In those days, in those faraway days, in those nights, in those faraway nights, in those years, in those faraway years, the god of wisdom. Enki, lord of the sweet waters beneath the earth, fashioned the likeness of the gods, and from clay and divine blood, he shaped the destiny of all who would walk upon the ground. A Sumerian hymn written nearly 5,000 years ago. Today, let's talk about a set of ancient clay tablets that contain what might be the most controversial origin story ever written. Not a myth about gods breathing life into dust, not a tale of divine will spoken into existence, but something far more unsettling. A step-by-step blueprint for how an advanced civilization designed and built the human race from scratch. The texts in question are attributed to Enki, one of the most powerful deities in the Sumerian pantheon. Enki was the god of wisdom, fresh water, magic, and creation. In the ancient city of Eridu, believed by the Sumerians to be the oldest city on Earth, Enki was revered above all others. He was a scientist, a healer, a trickster, and, according to the tablets, the being who personally engineered humanity into existence. The texts describe his account of why humans were made, how the process was carried out, what went wrong along the way, and what it ultimately cost him. These writings predate the book of Genesis by well over 1,000 years, and yet the parallels between the two are so striking that once you see them, it becomes very difficult to unsee them. To understand why humanity was created, according to these ancient Mesopotamian sources, we first need to understand the crisis that made it necessary. The tablets describe a group of powerful beings known as the Anunnaki, a name that translates roughly to those who from the heavens came to Earth. According to the texts, the Anunnaki arrived on Earth with a singular purpose. They needed gold, not for jewelry or currency, but for something far more critical. Their home world was facing an atmospheric catastrophe, and gold particles dispersed into the upper atmosphere could act as a reflective shield to protect the planet from radiation. It was a matter of survival for their entire civilization. Enki, the firstborn son of Anu, the supreme ruler, was sent to Earth to lead the gold extraction mission. He established his first base near the marshlands of what is now southern Iraq, in a settlement the tablets call Eridu. From there, the operation expanded southward into a region the texts refer to as the Abzu, believed by many researchers to correspond to southeastern Africa, where mining operations were set up deep underground. Now, here is where things get interesting. Enki did not come alone. Along with him came a workforce of lower-ranking Anunnaki called the Igigi, who were assigned to the brutal labor of mining gold from the earth. For generations they dug, they hauled, they worked in darkness beneath the ground in conditions the tablets describe as backbreaking and relentless. Eventually, tensions reached a breaking point. The Igigi could no longer bear the weight of endless toil. They gathered together, they burned their tools, and they surrounded the compound of Enlil, Enki's brother and the supreme commander of the Earth mission. The tablets describe the scene in vivid detail. The gods were digging the canals that were the life of the land. The gods dredged the Tigris River. The gods dredged the Euphrates. They heaped up all the mountains. For 40 years they bore the excess toil by day and night. They groaned, and then they rose up. This was not a quiet protest. It was a full-scale revolt. The workers refused to return to the mines, and without gold, the mission would fail, and with it, the survival of their home world. An emergency council was called. Anu himself came down to adjudicate. Enlil wanted to crush the rebellion with force, but Enki proposed something else entirely. Something that had never been attempted before. He stood before the assembled council and spoke. The creature whose name you uttered it already exists. All we need to do is bind upon it the image of the gods. Enki was referring to the primitive beings already roaming the plains of Africa. Upright creatures that walked on two legs and used their hands like the beings in the tall trees, but were not yet capable of speech, agriculture, or organized labor. What Enki proposed was not creation from nothing. It was modification. He wanted to take what already existed and reshape it, to merge the essence of the Anunnaki with the biology of these early hominids and produce a new being. A worker intelligent enough to follow commands and use tools but still bound to serve. The council debated fiercely. Some saw it as an abomination. Others saw no alternative. In the end, they agreed. Enki and his half-sister Ninhursag, the chief medical officer of the mission, were tasked with carrying out the work. What follows in the tablets is arguably the most detailed account of creation found anywhere in the ancient world. Enki and Ninhursag set up what the texts describe as a special chamber, a place of purification, in the region of the Abzu. They began by selecting a young male from among the early hominids. Then they took the essence of a young Anunnaki and mixed it with the clay of the earth. The tablets use the word clay, but scholars have long debated whether this was literal earth or a metaphor for biological material. What is remarkable is the level of procedural detail. The texts describe Ninhursag mixing the substance, shaping it, reciting words of power over it, and then placing it into a vessel to gestate. 14 vessels in total, 7 on the left and 7 on the right. When the time came, Ninhursag opened the vessels and brought forth the first beings, 7 males and 7 females, not 1 Adam and 1 Eve. 14. Created simultaneously. But it was not a clean success. The tablets make clear that the process was riddled with failure. Before the 14 were born, Enki and Ninhursag went through round after round of failed experiments. Beings were produced that could not close their hands, beings that could not hold their bladders, beings whose eyes would not open, beings whose ribs were malformed. One by one they emerged wrong, broken in different ways. Each failure was documented and each one led to adjustments. This was not divine will. This was trial and error. It was a process of testing, failing, modifying, and testing again. The Sumerian text known as Enki and Ninmah describes this cycle in striking detail, even recording a kind of competition between Enki and Ninhursag, where each tried to outdo the other by creating increasingly challenging forms and finding roles for Hem in society. The tablets describe it almost playfully, but beneath that surface lies something extraordinary. These are the oldest known descriptions of what we might today recognize as experimental procedure. Eventually, the process was refined, and the first successful being was produced. The tablets call him the Adamu. He was healthy, he was strong, he could understand commands and perform labor. But there was a limitation that had been built in deliberately. The Adamu could not reproduce. The tablets are very specific about this. The first humans were designed to be sterile. They could work, but they could not create new generations on their own. Every new worker had to be gestated by Anunnaki females who served as surrogate birth mothers. This quickly became unsustainable. The Anunnaki females began to complain about the burden of constant surrogate pregnancies. Once again, the system was breaking down. This is where Enki did something that would change everything and that would set him on a collision course with his brother Enlil. Working in secret, Enki found a way to modify the Adamu and his female counterpart so that they could bear children on their own. He gave them the ability to reproduce naturally, to know each other, as the tablets put it. And when this happened, the reaction from Enlil was immediate and furious. In Enlil's view, Enki had gone too far. The humans were tools. They were instruments of labor. Giving them the ability to multiply without oversight meant losing control over their numbers and, eventually, over them entirely. Enlil ordered the humans expelled from the Eden, the protected settlement where they had been living and working. Cast out from the enclosure, the first humans were sent into the wild to fend for themselves. Now pause for a moment and consider this. A garden-like enclosure where the first humans are placed, a tree of knowledge that represents something forbidden, a serpent figure who grants knowledge against the will of a higher authority, an expulsion from paradise. If this sounds familiar, it should. The book of Genesis tells this same story, but centuries later, and with the names changed. In the Sumerian version, there is no original sin. There is no moral failing. The so-called forbidden knowledge was simply the biological ability to have children, and the figure who granted it was not a villain. It was Enki. In the oldest known version of this story, the serpent was the hero. The Sumerians even depicted Enki with the symbol of two intertwined serpents, an image that thousands of years later became the caduceus, the symbol of medicine that is still used today. It is worth noting just how many details from the Sumerian account show up in later religious traditions. Genesis says God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The Sumerian tablets say Enki shaped the Adamu from clay mixed with divine essence. Genesis says God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam and took one of his ribs to create Eve. The Sumerian word ti means both rib and life, and scholars have long suspected that this was a translation error carried forward across millennia. What was originally life became rib, and an entire theology was built on the misunderstanding. Genesis chapter 1 verse 26 reads, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." That word us has puzzled biblical scholars for centuries. In the Sumerian account, there is no puzzle. The creation of humanity was a collaborative project carried out by multiple beings working together. The implications of this moment cannot be overstated. With the ability to reproduce freely, humanity was no longer a controlled commodity. It was a living, breathing population that would grow and spread and eventually develop a will of its own, and that is precisely what happened. After the expulsion from the Eden, human populations began to grow rapidly. They spread across the land. They developed skills. They built settlements. Some of the Anunnaki, particularly the Ajiji stationed on a relay outpost, began to notice the beauty of human women and took them as partners. The children born from these unions were described as mighty ones, beings of great stature and ability. This too echoes a passage in Genesis chapter 6, which speaks of the sons of God coming unto the daughters of men and bearing children who became mighty men of old, men of renown. In the Hebrew tradition, they are called the Nephilim. In the Sumerian tablets, they are the hybrid offspring of gods and humans, and their existence would become yet another source of conflict between Enki and Enlil. As the human population swelled, Enlil grew increasingly disturbed. The noise of humanity kept him from rest. Their numbers grew beyond what he had ever sanctioned. When Enlil learned that a great natural catastrophe was approaching, a flood of devastating proportions, he saw his opportunity. He called a council and made every being present swear an oath of secrecy. No one would warn the humans. They would be left to perish in the rising waters. Enki swore the oath along with the others. But Enki, being Enki, found a way around it. He could not speak to a human directly, so instead he spoke to a wall. He stood beside a reed partition and spoke aloud, knowing full well that his most loyal follower, a man named Zeusudra, was listening on the other side. "Reed wall, hear my words. Heed my instructions. Tear down your house and build a boat. Abandon possessions and save life. The boat that you shall build, let its dimensions be measured." And so the man built the vessel, and when the waters came, he survived. When Enlil discovered that humans had endured the flood, he was consumed with rage. But Enki argued before the council that the destruction of an entire species was unjust, that the punishment did not fit the crime. And slowly, reluctantly, Enlil accepted that humanity would remain. This is the story that predates Noah by more than 1,000 years. The same structure, the same warning, the same boat, the same flood, the same divine anger, and the same survival. Written on clay tablets in a language that was already ancient when Abraham was born. Every major flood tradition across the world, from the Hindu account of Manu to the Greek story of Deucalion, to the countless indigenous oral histories from every inhabited continent, shares this same skeleton: a warning, a vessel, a cataclysm, and a handful of survivors chosen to carry the species forward. The Sumerians simply wrote it down first. What makes the Sumerian account so remarkable is not just what it says, but how it says it. These are not vague proclamations from the heavens. They are detailed records written in a procedural, almost clinical tone. They describe failures and adjustments. They name the individuals involved. They document disagreements among the creators themselves. Whether you read them as literal history, elaborate mythology, or something in between, one thing is undeniable. Thousands of years before modern genetics, before DNA was discovered, before the word chromosome existed, someone carved into wet clay a story about beings who blended their own biological material with that of a primitive species to create something new. And they described the process with a specificity that we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. The question is not whether you believe it. The question is, who wrote it? How did they know to write it? And why, after thousands of years, does the story still feel like it is trying to tell us something we are not quite ready to hear?